Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Super Feeler podcast. My name is Lori, and I'm extra stoked today to be joined by my beautiful husband, Aaron, who is always slightly resistant to recording with me, but today I made him, so here we go. Before we start, I just wanted to thank our Patreon members, so Megan, Heather, Dave, Kat, and Shannon. Thank you all so much for your support. I really appreciate it. And as we go into the winter months, you'll start to see more and more bonus episodes coming up. Okay, so this is your first time coming on the Super Feeler podcast. You've been on my previous podcast 2 or 3 times, I feel like.
Something like that.
So there's a lot of listeners of this who probably haven't listened to previous podcasts that I've been on. Do you want to talk a little bit about yourself for a hot second? I know you don't. That was a rhetorical question, but can you talk about yourself for a hot second?
Sure. I'm Aaron. I'm Lori's husband. I've been around for, 8 years? Something like that?
Yeah, I think that's right.
I have no background in anything, so don't listen to anything that I say. Yeah, no psych degree, no mental health history, so I don't know anything.
That is definitely not true. I mean, he doesn't have a psych degree. He has a criminology degree, which is close, maybe-ish.
Do you think, you know how they do honorary doctorates? Do you think they'll do an honorary psych degree for, being married to you?
I mean, they really should. Should we reach out?
Yeah,
just be
I
like,
think so.
Hi, I don't know if this exists, but if we could make it exist, I feel like this poor man deserves some recognition behind his name. Yes, we should do that. I will grant you an honorary BPD diagnosis, maybe. I don't even know. As part of this podcast and life. So, yeah, we met 8 years ago-ish, give or take, in a restorative justice class where we talked a lot about shame, trauma, whatever. And so you were sitting across the room from me going who is this bitch? And because I was talking about BPD and domestic violence and all this stuff. And then you asked me, or you came up to me in the hallway one day when we were going to, if anybody here went to SFU, Simon Fraser University, you'll know Renaissance Coffee and the AQ. You came up to me and said, I Googled you. You're really interesting. And I was like...
And it worked.
And it worked. Here we are, married with 4 cats. But you kind of had an understanding of what borderline... Well, no, that's not true. You knew I had borderline personality disorder before we started dating.
I guess that was probably 4 classes in or something like that. So there was the class portion and then the tutorial portion, which is you're with a TA and a smaller group of people, and that's where we met. And yeah, so I guess you were talking about BPD, and so I Googled it and I Googled you, and I guess I saw some of the stuff that you did, and I read up about BPD briefly online, and I mean, I'd only known you for 4 weeks or something like that, or seen you and interacted with you for 4 weeks or so. But I was like, this doesn't seem to ring true to me. So thought I'd strike up a conversation.
And you did. And then he asked me out, and then I rejected him.
Yep.
But then here we are.
Or you said yes, and then you panicked, and then I said, it's cool if the answer's no, bro. And then
I ran away.
No, and then you said yes.
Yeah, that's the long story short. But I'm very happy to be married to you. You are my favorite human being on earth, the best cat dad ever, and an incredible partner to somebody who has mental health issues despite having none yourself. So, I mean, as people who listen to this can imagine, having a wife with borderline personality disorder is not necessarily an easy breezy cover girl experience. But for the most part, I feel like we manage it incredibly well. Yeah, so it's not necessarily the easiest life ever, but we make it work. And I would say generally speaking, works pretty well. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think we make it work, but also we've been together for a while, so
we make it work. And then what happened in July or June? Shit started going downhill real fast. So I've had, I've self-harmed technically since we've met, but very minorly and not something that's reoccurring. It's kind of one-offs. Obviously, living with BPD, the suicidal ideation is kind of always in the back of my head, but it's never been a crisis like it was this summer. And honestly, like, I don't think it's been a crisis like it was this summer. I think maybe one other time it's been that bad. And when it was that bad, it was like short-lived, whereas this was like very long-lived. So what happened was I was on Zoloft previously, and I had been on Seroquel for like 11 years. I had stopped taking it last summer, like titrated down. There's Patreon episodes about like the titration experience, and like things were going really well. I was really happy to not be on it. And the reason that I wasn't on it was not because I like didn't want to be on it, right? Like it wasn't like, oh, I'm too good for this or whatever. It was just that I'd been on it since I was like 18. And I was like, I want to see what life is like without this drug.
Yeah, because you reduced your dosage for a long time to almost nothing.
Nothing.
There was a while where it was like a quarter of a pill instead of like 2 or whatever.
Yeah, so that was like 7.25 milligrams of Seroquel or quetiapine. So like, if you know anything about Seroquel, like that's basically a placebo at that point. Like that's a very, very small dose. But then when I got down to that low and I was like ready to kind of come off of it, COVID happened. And I was like, this feels like maybe not the right time to like stop taking my drugs, because like that did mess with my head pretty bad.
Give me all of the things that make me not ruminate at night and stay up.
Exactly, because there was so much to ruminate about, right? And so I had been on Zoloft and Seroquel for like a long time, stopped taking Seroquel last summer. Things were great. I was having some like minor side effects from the Zoloft. For those of you who have been on SSRIs, you know that like sexual side effects are not uncommon. So I won't go into details, but you can imagine probably what some of the things I was struggling with were. And I was like, you know what? I'm doing really well. This side effect is kind of driving me nuts. I'm going to see if I can switch to a different drug, which is fair. You know, for a lot of people, there is like a magical cocktail of drugs. And I obviously wasn't on my magical cocktail because I was having this side effect that was like impacting my life. Not really, but it was just like driving me nuts.
And don't a lot of people on antidepressants end up going through a bunch of them before they normally find what the one that works best for them is?
Yeah, for sure. And I've been on like 7 or 8, right? So like this one seemed to be doing good things for my mood, but I was still kind of like, maybe there's like some sort of other alternative. And so talked to my nurse practitioner, who was like incredible. Like we're so lucky to have our nurse practitioner in Canada. That's like not a super common experience to have like a family nurse practitioner who acts as your general practitioner. And she's amazing. And we talked about like switching to something that has like a lower side effect profile. And what she was going to switch me to was venlafaxine, which is Effexor. So what she was going to switch me to was Effexor, which is an SNRI. So as an antidepressant medication, serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor class, used to treat major depression, generalized anxiety, panic disorder, and social anxiety. And that's actually another thing, is that my social anxiety had gotten a lot worse since COVID, and I was having a hard time going to social stuff. We would get in the car to like, you know, let's say we had dinner plans with friends, and I would get in the car and I would just be like, I can't do this. I don't want to do this. This is too much. And it was like not how I normally was. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, like before that, I don't even know if I would have thought that you had social anxiety. Before that, I think if you had social anxiety, it was well managed or well, pushed down. And
person specific, situational, like...
Yes, I think person specific, it was there, but I think maybe it snowballed into most social situations.
Yeah. Yeah, which is not pleasant. Like, I'm a very, like, in theory, a very social person. I have, like, amazing, incredible friends and, like, lots of them. And so it was just, like, not great. So there was also this kind of thought that, like, I might have these OCD traits. And so basically this Effexor / venlafaxine was supposed to be helping with all of those things while also lowering the sexual side effects. Yeah, so basically what my nurse practitioner decided to do was lower my Zoloft / whatever that regular name is called, and titrate me down from the Zoloft and titrate me up on the Effexor at the same time. And so the hope was that we didn't want to like go off of antidepressants altogether and then start a new one. We wanted to just like do a easy breezy transition. What's interesting is that every time I called or every time I tried to fill my prescription, the pharmacist would be like, "You can't do this. Like, what are you doing? Like, you can't take an SNRI and an SSRI at the same time. Like, we won't give this to you." And so I had to do like a whole bunch of phone calls to be like, my doctor, my nurse practitioner, I call her my doctor, says that this is fine. Like, we're just doing it to titrate on and off. Like, it should be okay. And they were like, "Okay, fine." So, but this happened every time I filled it. So maybe that should have been my first like red flag of like, no matter what pharmacist I talk to, they have problems with this concoction. But they were really concerned about like serotonin syndrome.
Yeah, I think that's because I think I had to pick up your prescriptions at some point, and I think it was the serotonin syndrome that they were worried about.
Yeah, not like major fucking depression. So anyways, basically they're doing this titration and I got very suicidal. And there were a couple of situational factors that were coming up at the time. Like there were 3 situational factors that I can identify that were like not pleasant experiences, but they were nothing that I wouldn't have been able to cope with like before this, right? Like, I don't know about you, but
yeah, like all of them happening at once maybe would suck, but I don't think would be. I think maybe they would be less of an issue individually, and then the like compounding effects of all of it would also be less of an issue.
Exactly. Yeah. So like it was one of those things where I would talk to a doctor or a psychiatrist and be like, "Oh, like, is this stuff going on?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, but I have skills. Like I've been living with BPD for so long that like I could normally manage all of these things on my own, or like with my counselor support and with your support and whatever." But for some reason, I was like completely unable to manage. And so we had a barbecue at our house. We had like 50 people come to our house for a barbecue. And I had basically decided that like that was going to be my goodbye party. Nobody knew that, obviously, but I had like decided that that was going to be when I was like done. So I had self-harmed like the day before for the first time in like many, 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 many years. And then the barbecue happened. I ended up getting COVID at the barbecue, which was unfortunate, which of course then makes things worse. I don't remember why I decided not to do it the next day, but I was starting to like have very, 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 very detailed rumination, like not even rumination, like plans. And there was no stopping me at this point. It was just like a waiting game to see when I was going to do it. My counselor had talked to, or no, my nurse practitioner had said, like, you know, to help with like mitigation of risk, like you need to like get rid of stuff that you might self-harm with. You need to get rid of like stuff that you don't like, pills. You need to have Erin manage those, whatever. And I was like, yep, for sure. But then I didn't. I like just never told him that. And when my counselor found that out, she was like very concerned because normally I'm like a very good patient, right? I do what I'm told. I will like advocate for myself when I need to, but like I trust science, I trust medicine, I trust physicians for the most part. And my counselor was like, this is a huge red flag. So she called you.
Yes. Was it
with my consent?
Or the NP? It was
yeah, I guess. It was my counselor.
Okay.
Yeah. So what was that like for you?
I'm trying to think back. I can't remember. I think she called me, and as I picked up the phone, I saw a message from you saying, FYI, counselor might call you. And I was like, oh, okay. I mean, I think at that point we knew that you were struggling with stuff. I guess it made sense in a way in that it wasn't a complete out of the blue shock, but because your counselor didn't really discuss specifics, it, you know, seems more of a preventative thing, like of a just in case kind of thing, or here's something that we can do to help her, rather than, you know, we need to do this now. There was some urgency in that it was, you know, we would like for you to do this if you feel comfortable doing this. But it wasn't like, you need to do this right now or Lori's going to kill herself.
Right. And the other thing is, like, I've been with that counselor since we got together, and like, she's never called you. Right. So there's obviously like some level of, this is obviously more serious than other suicidal ideation that she's had in the past.
Yeah. And what I mean by like not a huge urgency was that it wasn't like they were calling me and saying, you know, you need to do this. You need to run Laura to the hospital right now. I think maybe it was just approached with tact, but, you know, it still came through that it was important and not something to be ignored, I guess.
Yeah, it wasn't optional. It was maybe wasn't urgent, but it wasn't optional, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that it was optional, you know, from the perspective of if I wasn't comfortable doing that, she probably would have talked to the NP at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you did it, right? Like, you locked all my meds away and you were managing my meds for a long time.
Not very well.
I forgot. Oh my God. Go.
I'm trying to think of all of the different things. So I think the first time I was managing...
You, like, bought a lockbox, like, for the record.
So, yeah, I bought a lockbox and it had 2 keys, and I kept telling myself the 2 keys were on one key ring, and I kept telling myself, oh yeah, I'll separate these keys, it'll be fine. And then I lost the keys, had no idea where they were, and I was changing the location of the key every day so that even if Lori knew where the lockbox is, she wouldn't know where the keys were. You know, if it's time for Aaron to get my medication, he's downstairs, I know that the keys must be downstairs somewhere, or he always goes into the bedroom, I know that it must be in the bedroom. So I changed the keys location every day, and I guess one day I had it in my pocket because I got the medications out and we were watching TV, so then she saw where the lockbox was and she knew what room the keys would have been in, so I had them in my pocket so that when she went to bed, I'd be able to hide them somewhere else. And then I forgot to do that, and the next day she's like, oh, where are my drugs? And I'm like, oh, I think the keys are in my pocket, and they weren't. So I had to go searching for that. And then 3 days after that, I've got the keys, still 2 keys on one key ring because I'm dumb. I'm unlocking the lockbox and I'm trying to figure out where am I going to put these keys. And I dropped them onto the inside of the printer. So I had to try to fish those out of the inside of the printer. There was another time I lost your keys.
Yeah, there was another time. I don't remember what they were, but then there was also a 4th time where we were going to go spend time at your parents' house. And because you were responsible for my meds, we were just going to be there for a night because we were going to go do something in the next day. And you, like, forgot the, like, most important drug somehow. And then, like,
yeah, they were on a pile. And I think I was like, okay, I'm going to put the clothes in first. So I moved the pill bottles off of the clothes and then forgot to put the pill bottles in the bag after.
Yeah, so we, like, got to his parents' place, which is, like, an hour away. It's not, like, horrible. And we're, like, getting ready for bed. And I'm like, my meds aren't here. And, like, at this point, we were, like, being very, very careful about, like, taking my meds at the same time, same place, like, all this stuff. Anyways, it was hilarious. He was not very good he should not be a pharmacist. That would be a bad call. But I appreciate that you did that. But the issue, of course, with suicidality is, like, you take one method away and I find a new one. So I had then plans for a different method. And things started to get, like, very, 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 like, detailed in terms of, like, I won't go into the details, but very detailed in how I was going to do it, when I was going to do it. So I had regular calls with my counselor and my nurse practitioner at this point. And when I talked to my nurse practitioner, she was asking me how I was doing. And I didn't really lie. I just said, like, yeah, I have a plan. Like, this is what's going to happen and this is how I'm going to do it. And I don't really plan on being stopped. And she, bless her, was like, okay, well, in that case, you have 2 options. And I was like, what? And she's like, you can either drive yourself to the hospital immediately, or I will have police come to drive you to the hospital immediately. And I was like, well, I really don't want to get police involved. Like, you know, we've all heard the stories of how it can be really dangerous and whatever. She's like, okay. And I was like, and also, like, it's Friday morning. I have a bunch of meetings. I have a physio appointment tonight. Like, I'm going to have to pay a counseling or a cancellation fee if I do that. She was like, okay, well, I will call your physio right now and let them know that you won't be there. And you aren't going to your meetings this morning. So you should probably tell your boss. And if you need me to tell your boss for you, I'm happy to do so. And if I don't see you, because like they get notified when you enter the hospital, she's like, if I don't see that you're in the hospital in the next hour, police will be on their way.
Yeah, and then you said, oh, well, I don't know if Erin can take time off to drive me. And she was like, I'll drive you.
Yeah. And I was like, what? Like, this woman goes above and beyond. Like, we need to nominate this woman for an award or something. Like, she's absolutely incredible. Keep in mind, like, this was a virtual appointment when she was like, I'll drive you. Like, she was going to like leave her office for the day and come to pick me up at my house and drive me to the hospital. And luckily Erin was home. So I went downstairs and I was like, hey, like, I need to go to the hospital. Like, I know it's a work day. If you can take me, great. If you can't, like, that's okay. I'll figure it out. And of course, you took the day off, or most of the day off, to drive me. We ended up driving to a hospital that was, I mean, to be honest, like, how much further really is it? Like 5 minutes? Like, it's just like, it's not the hospital in our city. It's like the hospital in the connecting city, because we'd heard good things about the psychiatrist there. And we've also, you can check wait times online. And it was like a much, much shorter wait time than the hospital that we were going to go to.
Yeah, it was like an hour and a half instead of 8 or something like that.
Yeah. And I was like, I don't want to wait there for 8 hours. So we go. And of course, I'm like worried about stigma. I'm worried about being, well, I don't want to be stopped. Right. So like, yeah, I guess I went because I knew I needed to, and ended up meeting with all the doctors in my area. Gorgeous. First of all, I feel like I'm in Grey's Anatomy every time I'm in the hospital these days. I'm just like, who are you? So I met with this resident physician who was like just doing his like trial in psychiatry, or whatever it's called, like their rotation in psychiatry, I guess. He was saying, so he came after, like, I obviously been there for a long time. I'd been there a couple hours probably. And then he came and was like, so we've all been sitting at the nurse's station reading your chart. And you're like the perfect example of how this works. Like how this is supposed to work. The last time you were in hospital for mental health issues was 2016,
Something like that.
15, 16. Like, you've done dialectical behavior therapy. You do all of this other stuff. You've like won awards for your work in mental health advocacy specific to BPD. Like, he's like, we're literally reading your chart going like, what can we even possibly offer this person that like she doesn't already know? He's like, I would be referring people to you, let alone like not the other way around. Well, which is like lovely and like great, but also like, well, my doctor said I had to come here or else I was going to have the police take me. So like, can you provide any other help for me? Like, that would...
Yeah,
like,
on the one hand, I'm flattered. On the other, thanks.
Like, I'm going to kill
helpful.
myself. Yeah, exactly. Like, thanks, I'm still going to kill myself. Like, what are you going to do? Yeah, he was, like, lovely, and I literally had a DBT book in my backpack. I was like, I know all the skills. I have been able to manage this so well for so long. Something clearly is going wrong here. Like, I need some sort of something. And he was like, well, you meet the criteria for us to admit you. However, if we admit you, you're literally just going to sit in hospital for 3 days and then go home. He's like, there's nothing here that we can do for you. And it's like, okay, wonderful. How is that? Like, I appreciate his honesty, right? And I think he's talking to me so honestly because he can see, like, I work in the field, I understand this stuff. But at the same time, like, okay, so, like, you're just going to discharge me and send me home, and then what? Like, I start over? So at this point, you had gone back to work because I was like, you don't need to stay. Like, please go. You're lovely and I love you so much. And you always stay when I'm at the hospital. But like, at the end of the day, like, it's 8 hours of waiting.
At that point, it was a waiting game of when am I going to see the doctor?
Yeah. And also, like, there was things about my, like, plans that I didn't want you to know about. Not because, like, I didn't want you to be able to, like, intervene, but because I just didn't want to hurt you, right? And so I go home, or no, sorry. And then so I finally see the, like, real psychiatrist, not the one who was mentoring this other guy. And they're like, we can't really do anything.
I mean, I think that's the point where they said, well, you're on both of these medications, but neither of them is providing an effective dose at this point.
Exactly. So the again, like, not my nurse practitioner's fault. Like, she's amazing. But basically they think what happened was that I had been titrating down on the Zoloft and titrating up on the Effexor at the same time, to the point where the clinical level for either was here, but I wasn't actually meeting that threshold for either medication. So I was essentially without an antidepressant at the time. I was also having a really hard time sleeping, so they gave me so basically what he did is he was like, we're gonna screw this titration situation, we're just gonna ramp you up as high as we can go on Effexor and hope that works. All right, well, because part of it is like, well, maybe the new Effexor is because that was the added drug, like maybe that's what's causing the suicidality, right? It was a pretty big risky game. So he's like, we're gonna cut Zoloft altogether, up the Effexor, we're gonna give you Trazodone to help you sleep, because I had been on Seroquel forever. He's like, Trazodone is basically the same thing as Seroquel in terms of how it works. It just doesn't have the weight gain side effects, and it's like a more modern med. So like, we may as well just use that. And like, I've gained so much weight on Seroquel. It's like, okay, whatever. Like, at this point, I don't really care what I weigh as much as like not being alive. But I'll take Trazodone. And then he gave me Ativan, which was the first time I'd ever had a benzo prescribed to me, which is kind of surprising. And he was like, we're going to give you a very small amount of Ativan, because obviously, like, we're giving you all these new drugs and you're planning on killing yourself. We can't give you like enough to kill yourself. So we're just going to give you like 10 or whatever, 10 1 milligram pills. So he's like, but also the only way that we're going to let you go is if we can talk to your husband and if he's comfortable with like basically not working, like not working, but working from home for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, my call with him was basically, are you okay if she comes home, or do you want us to admit her? Which was very nice of them, rather than saying, here you go, you deal with whatever happens, making sure that there's someone who's actually there to and willing to do that and can do that. But yeah, it was basically, if you could stay home, go everywhere with her, basically stay together the whole time, at least while, over the next week or two, while we figure out if the new medication, is taking.
And thankfully, your boss was very understanding. Because like, he's supposed to go to the office like 2 times a week, right? And so it was going to be a difference. And I also had to decide at a certain point, like, am I able to go to work either? Like, I work from home the majority of the time, but am I comfortable driving by myself to like for 2 hours to get to work when I do have to go in? Because that's also like a risky situation. So it was definitely a bit of a lifestyle change, I would say, in that like, we were attached at the hip all the time, and I appreciate you for that.
But you don't want to be attached to the hip to anyone?
I feel so guilty, right? Like, I still feel guilty about like how much you have to put into this relationship just to keep me like going and alive and well. And I know that you're happy to do it because like you love me and you don't want me to die. But it still breaks my heart. So anyways, I came home and they had given me the Ativan with like very clear instructions that like I was only to use it. I think they said something to you on the phone about Ativan, right? About how like if she's having to take it every day, then it's not working. Like then the medication change is not working.
Yeah, I think it was like, it makes to be used as necessary in like real bad times, let's call it. But yeah, if she's needing one all the time, then the medication change hasn't worked. Which it might make sense for her to need, 1 or 2 in the first week, but it's really like a last resort kind of situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I had never taken a benzo before. I had very high hopes, and I was very disappointed because I'd heard great things about them, and I was like, oh, this is kind of lame. But I also know how dangerous they are and how addictive they are. So even though like I don't really have an addictive personality per se, and like I don't have history of addiction, I was still very concerned about like potentially getting addicted to this drug, right? So I was okay to not take it very often, or like not take it at all. So I had been discharged from the hospital on the Friday, or not discharged, but like went home from the hospital from the ER visit on the Friday. The weekend happened. We were kind of just like coping, I feel like is like a good way of putting it, on the weekend. I think that might have been the weekend of Steve's party, maybe. I remember just like being, our friend got permanent residency for the first time. He's like one of our best friends. And I was at his like, congratulations party, just like thinking about death the entire time. Like I just was like a shell of myself. And I think other people could tell that I was feeling that way. We're trying to be supportive, but I just like wasn't here for it because I was just like so like convinced that this is what I was going to do. So we kind of spent the weekend like functioning to the best of our ability, taking care of ourselves, I guess. And then the week happened. So going through the week, and I was still not feeling very well. I was having a really hard time sleeping. So this trazodone was supposed to work just like Seroquel. Seroquel for me works great. It helps with the rumination. It means that like I can actually fall asleep properly and all of these things. The trazodone was not working. Like I would take the trazodone and then I would be like awake for like 3 hours, 6 hours. Like it was so weird. So yeah, it was a very strange situation where I was supposed to be getting better from this drug and it was making it worse. And then Aaron, this bless him, love of my life. This man takes a melatonin and passes out in 4 minutes and like can't be arisen. So he was also trying to stay up to like make sure that I was okay, but I just like couldn't sleep. So then I started working like a maniac. So I was like taking this trazodone that was supposed to put me to sleep, and then I was up for another 12 hours. And I was like working until 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, going for like really like speed walks at like 3 o'clock in the morning by myself, and was like, this is fucking weird. Like, what is going on? So basically, I don't know why or how, but basically what had happened is this trazodone that was supposed to put me to sleep had essentially caused me to be manic, almost like hypomania, like something very different than what was supposed to happen. And it started as like, I'm so productive. Like, I love this. This is amazing. Like, I had all my emails dealt with. I was like on it. I had like everything figured out. And then it got to the point where I couldn't sleep when I wanted to. So like I had been kind of staying up all night working, and then like work a little bit in the morning and then have a nap and then work more. And so it kind of worked out. And then it got to the point where I couldn't have naps anymore. So I went to a yoga class. No, so I was at my friend Sarah's house on the Friday to just like working from her house, because we had somebody coming to do work at our house, and it's just easier from out of her hair. So I went to go to my friend Sarah's house to work. I was there by myself, and I had a counseling appointment in the morning, and my counselor could tell that I was not well. This like lack of sleep is like really affecting you. You don't sound good. I've worked with you for 8 years. Something is very wrong here. She had said, we need to do something different. This is not going to work. Basically, we decided that we would refer me to this like inpatient program. It's technically like a residential program. I don't know if that really makes a huge difference, but it's not in a hospital. It's like in a medical facility outside of a hospital. And she was like, we're going to refer you. I can refer you. Because it's like a thing that like she could do as a counselor. But the only caveat is that if you want to go there, you can't be actively suicidal. And so we were like, okay, good to know. You have to kind of play the system sometimes. And this was the only help that I was going to be able to get outside of a hospital, that they were basically saying at the hospital, they can't help me anyways. So she sent in the referral. After my counseling appointment, I tried to have a nap and couldn't sleep. And then I tried like all day to have a nap, couldn't sleep. Went to my like favorite yoga class in the evening. Restorative yoga, deep stretch with like a yoga nidra medication at the end. And I literally I like got to this yoga class that I go to every Friday, stared at the ceiling and just bawled my eyes out for an hour and a half. And I was so tired, but my body wouldn't sleep. And I was like so wired at the same time. And I got in the car after the yoga class and like recorded a suicide note on my phone. Drove home and just sat in my car crying. And I guess Aaron had seen me like pull up but not get out of the car. So he came to see if I was okay, and I was just like weeping. And then I ran past him downstairs, got a pen and paper, and tried to like write all my bank passwords out because I was like just fucking done. And I guess right before I had gone to the yoga class, I had tried to like scour the entire house for the box of pills and like I found the pill box, but I couldn't find the key. So I was trying to pry it open with like a pliers.
I probably couldn't have found it either.
Literally. So I was like trying to pry it open with pliers. Couldn't get it before yoga, but I was like, okay, I'll get it after. Like, I don't even care anymore. I'll find a way. And so Aaron and I sat on the floor and crying, and I was like, I need one of those Ativan now. And he was like, yeah, I feel like that's a fair situation. And he was like, we should go to the hospital. And I was like, I know we need to go to the hospital. Like 100% we need to go to the hospital. But if we go to the hospital, I'm not going to get into that treatment center.
And there was also a bit of, but I don't wanna.
Well, there was also that, but I think the main part was literally like, both of us were thinking it. If I go into the hospital, they're going to take me off the wait list for this treatment center that I desperately need.
Yeah, and all we knew is that you can't be actively suicidal. And, you know, what does that mean? Does that mean I don't have any intention in the near future and I'm doing pretty well? Or does that mean I'm not trying to die by suicide in this exact moment? So
Exactly.
That was kind of unclear. And, you know, we knew that going to the hospital it was like Lori might get in on Monday. There's a bed available. It's just a matter of over the weekend whether that goes to a hospital because they get priority. And then we're trying to figure out, well, how do they get priority? Who's going to the hospital when they're not actively suicidal, saying, hey, I'm having some trouble and want a referral to this program? So it was a bit of a difficult thing to navigate, to try to not risk your chances at what seemed like the only option for treatment at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And the potential of losing that.
Yeah, it was really, really hard. Thankfully, that night, I took the Ativan. Luckily, like, I had been so exhausted by that, and like we were just sitting in bed crying for so long that I was able to fall asleep finally.
Maybe the Ativan did something, but you did go on about how it was...
How disappointed I was.
Yeah. It was vastly oversold.
It was vastly oversold. I was like, I don't even know this doesn't make any sense. But anyways, yeah, it was a very, very stressful time. And this seems like a good place to end this episode, which is a bit of a cliffhanger unintentionally, mostly because we have to bring the cat in for something. Yeah, I mean, it was not a fun time. We will go into what happened the next week on the next episode. But
spoiler
Aaron,
alert,
I love you.
Lori is still around.
Can you imagine? I'm actually a ghost. I look like a ghost. Every time I film these, I'm like, why am I so pale in this camera? No matter what I do with the lighting. But yeah, so spoiler alert, I'm still around, but you'll have to wait until next week to hear what happened. If you need any suicide resources, please check the resources in the show notes, because this is a very heavy episode, but I promise that it all worked out in the end. And I think this is just the reality of what it's like to live like people like us. So Aaron, I love you. Thanks for being on. And
love you too.
We'll talk soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Superfeeler podcast. Today's episode was recorded on the unceded traditional territory of the Matsqui and Sumas First Nations. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps me reach more listeners like you, and we're always looking for improving the podcast. Remember, you can always stay connected with me on social media. You can follow us. The show notes will have all of the details for Instagram profiles. If you want to support the podcast and help me continue to bring great content, please consider joining the Superfeeler community on Patreon. Your support really means the world to me, and there's a variety of different options for support, including some free ones. For all information about the Superfeelers Club, which is the peer support that we run, including upcoming events and resources, head over to Eventbrite or LoriEdmondson.com for more information. And if you have a topic that you want me to cover or a guest you'd love to hear from, please send me the suggestions. Always happy to hear them.
Until next time, keep on super feeling and living authentically. This is Lori signing off of the Super Feeler podcast.